Okay, I didn't actually make this one, but how cool would it be though if I had? Because this one has pockets. But anyway, welcome to episode 4 of our 2024 Style Study Month. That's right, friends, we are almost all the way through. Thank you so much for sticking with me, especially if you've been here this entire month. Today we're looking at an artist whose style just does something to my soul. It's like Renaissance art meets digital modern character design, and there's textures and there's lighting, and it does something for me. Today we're looking at the gorgeous character art of an amazing artist known as Daniel Walsh, better known by his IG name ARTWALSHY. Trust me, you guys are absolutely gonna love his work. But yeah, if this is your very first style study, hi, welcome. My name is Srish and I'm so glad you're here because today we're gonna level up your art by like 1,000,000%. Style Study is a regular series we do here on my channel where we take a look at some of our favorite contemporary artists, analyze their work and see what we can learn from it. Keyword, learn. We're not here to plagiarize anyone's work or copy their style. We're simply here to learn some really cool art tips and tricks and see how we can apply them to finding our own unique art style. I usually structure my style studies in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll take a look at Daniel's work, analyze his style and see what we can learn from it. Part 2 will be a study of one of his original paintings. The stunning reference I've chosen today is this one. And in part 3, we'll apply everything that we learned today to an original painting of our own. And I may or may not have gone the fan art route with that one. You'll just have to wait and watch. As always, if you enjoyed this video and learned something today, please remember to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Comment below your biggest takeaway from this study and come say hello on social media. All my links are down in the description below. Alrighty, whenever you're ready for the penultimate time this year, grab a snack, sit back, and let's dive into another style study featuring Daniel Walsh. Daniel Walsh is a character artist based in Sydney, Australia. He was classically trained in art over in Sweden, and you can definitely see the skill that goes into the art itself and also in how he approaches the painting process. He currently works as a senior character concept artist on Call of Duty for Sledgehammer Games, though he has previously worked as a concept artist on Flintlock Siege of Dawn and Super Pets, and once also did illustrations for the Star Wars franchise and Warhammer, among others. Daniel's beautiful art has garnered him over 26.5 thousand followers on Instagram and over 1.2 thousand subscribers here on YouTube. Now, obviously, the majority of Daniel's work is painted digitally, but you probably wouldn't be able to tell because it all looks like oil paintings. Like, look at this painting and tell me it doesn't look like it was painted on canvas. There is so much gorgeous texture and brushwork in every single painting. It's almost like you could reach out and feel the bumpiness of dried paint or the rough weave of the canvas. I definitely want to dive into this a little later. First though, can we talk about the gorgeous lighting and drama? Even in a super straightforward portrait, Daniel seems to inject so much mood and just so much life into the piece. Like, his art is very emotionalist. Speaking of list, here are 4 key characteristics to Daniel Walsh's art. To begin, let's talk all about realism, because that is the biggest thing about Daniel's work that really jumps out at me. The characters aren't super wildly stylized, their proportions aren't caricaturized to be extremely appealing or a storytelling device. These characters are realistic. So if you look at the faces here, Daniel keeps the eyes at about the halfway point of the head, not too low. The nose isn't super minimized and the mouth isn't very tiny or very pouty either. The jaw and chin are very believable, they're not super narrow, rounded and pointy. The bodies aren't really exaggerated to be extremely curvy and voluptuous, nor extremely inhumanly muscular. Everything is very much within the realm of deviation for an actual IRL human being. And that makes complete sense, seeing as quite a lot of Daniel's art starts as photo studies. Honestly, this style study may have subconsciously pushed me to the 100 heads challenge, but that's neither here nor there. What's really cool is even with the original characters he paints, everything is still very much realistic. It's like he starts with a very generic human base, then builds up the story around it. Now, obviously that is probably an overly simplified explanation, and he definitely, clearly, puts way more thought into his design process than that, but like, his character design almost seems modular in a way. Okay, take this character for instance. The first thing you see is that bright flash of the blue face paint. This feels like a sort of tribal thing, like this character associates with a specific group of people and they like to rep that group. If we take that away, we then see the armor. So this is actually a warrior of some kind, potentially a knight. If we then take that layer away, we still have the haircut. The buzzed undercut and sort of scraggly mullet feels like a very contemporary and or futuristic thing. I don't think people back in the day wore their hair like this, least of all knights. And then under that layer, it is just a human being. But as the design builds up, you get to a futuristic warrior who fights for a very specific tribe. That was a fun exercise, let's try it again with this character. First, that furry coat. She for sure comes from a cold place where it is cold enough in the day to warrant a fur-trimmed coat. Take that layer away and you see the feathers. There's a couple of different types of feathers on the same headdress. Headdresses and feathers are something we usually associate with witches or priestesses or shamans, people who are tuned into the elements of nature. The next layer is that lilac hair. Clearly an unnatural color, this character definitely likes to look a certain way and has access to modern hair dye. Perhaps even futuristic dye, because that color is not easy to achieve or maintain. How did she get the brassiness out? Anyway, take that layer away and you have more face paint, but this feels more decorative rather than a tribal symbol. And then under that layer, we see a human being. Add it all together and we see a futuristic witch or shaman who comes from a cold place and is as tuned into her appearance as she is to nature. Now, you might think this is just an easy way to gradually build up a character and add to their story in increments, but this kind of layered approach serves a very important purpose. Because you see, when you peel all those layers back under all that design detail, it is at the end of the day just a human being. And that is something you and I can relate to because we are also just human beings. Unless you're watching this in the year 35,000 and you're an alien who has taken over the planet, in which case, hi, why didn't you come sooner? But the point is, we're human, and when we see that deep down Daniel's characters are also human, it creates a very powerful effect, that of relatability. When we look at these characters, no matter how simple or complex they are, the fact that they are very much realistic means that we identify with them. We see ourselves in their faces, can picture us in their shoes, and that right there is the key to creating incredibly captivating characters. So this is where you really see the influence of traditional art training, because Daniel pretty much always sticks to a single, fairly bright key light, and it is usually either warm or neutral in terms of the temperature. So while this piece has very warm sunlight, this one here has a very neutral light. Still very much looks like daylight, but it's not quite as warm. But here's the thing, the bright, warm, neutral, single key light setup actually serves to really enhance the realism in Daniel's work. Why? Because that is the most powerful, most frequent lighting scenario any of us will ever come across. We tend to live most of our waking life in broad daylight, and it usually either comes directly from the sun or from a singular window. It is a very directional light with a single source. So everything we know of the world around us, we know to be in a single warm neutral key light scenario. However, Daniel actually uses this light setting as a base and then goes on to build up a lot of drama using some very warm midtones and shadows. Yes, the shadows are significantly darker than the highlights, and it really does push the form and how the planes shift powerfully as they go away from the light source. This is why the single light portrait setup will never be dethroned. But he also creates a lot of drama through the color contrast. Like here, the shadows on both the character and the horse veer very orange, and it really pops loudly against the blue background of the sky. Or here, despite the brightest highlight tone being a pale yellow, that red in the shadow is so saturated, it makes the highlight look cooler toned. As artists, we tend to treat color and light as two separate aspects of our painting process because it makes it so much easier to compartmentalize and plan our paintings out. But we often forget that color and light are essentially the very same thing. There is literally no color without light, like you can't see colors in the dark. But without colors, even the most dramatic lighting scenario can feel dead. I feel like Daniel's work beautifully exemplifies the melting point of color and light and how you need to use both these aspects in tandem in order to paint pieces that not only look dramatic but also feel alive. Okay, so when I make these style studies, I like to work off of just the end results of an artist's paintings, as opposed to watching the process of creating the painting, especially when I'm doing the study and original painting portions for the video, because I don't want to be subconsciously influenced by their technique, just their actual end products. But after I finished both the pieces for the study, I couldn't resist it and I had to go on and watch Daniel paint because oh dear God, that insanely powerful oil painting-y render is a look that I cover from the depths of my very being. It didn't influence how I painted for parts 2 and 3 of this video, but it's definitely made me reevaluate what I see in his art. Here's what I learned. Just like with the character design, the brushwork builds up gradually. He doesn't necessarily paint in an alla prima way, where the colors you put down first are the colors you see in the end, but rather it is a slow build-up of values and colors that mingle and overlap to create a super nuanced render. The other thing I noticed is that he uses textured brushes right from the get-go. He pretty much sticks to 2 or 3 oil painting-y looking brushes, but the texture isn't something he tacks on at the end like a photo texture overlay or anything like that. It is pretty much baked into the painting from the very beginning. That said, however, this is where the skill comes in. The texture in the end product is never overwhelming. There is always a good balance between areas that look heavily textured and others that look softer and more blended out. And as far as I can tell, there may actually be a pattern to this. You'll see that the textures usually lie in the brightest highlights and the deepest shadows. The midtones, especially in the skin, tend to be blended out smoothly. And this actually ties into a traditional oil painting-y look nicely, because here's the thing. When you're painting traditionally, you're not just thinking of what color to put down to get a certain look. You're gonna have to think in terms of layers and glazes and paint thickness. Generally speaking, deeper tones tend to be super pigmented, so like a burnt umber or a cobalt blue would be too intense to use directly. If an oil painter wanted to intensify a shadow tone, they would likely thin it out quite a bit, and as a result, this causes the shadowy area to look a little streaky and textured. On the other hand, lighter tones, things like ivory white, tend to be harder to see over dark areas, so in order to really make them visible, you'd really need to lay it on thick, which then causes a different type of texture. The midtones, meanwhile, blend into each other just fine and can be made to look uniform and smooth because they'd layer onto each other easily. So by arranging the textures in this way, Daniel was really able to emulate that delicious texture you see in traditional oil on canvas paintings. Now, here's the other thing about how Daniel paints texture. It isn't just a sort of byproduct of the brushwork. Daniel also uses texture to create very powerful abstraction. First and foremost, I realized that Daniel gives all materials the same treatment when it comes to textures. He uses pretty much the same brush and the same rendering techniques, whether he's painting skin, hair, fabric, or jewelry. So it's not like the skin gets hit by a certain brush, the hair with another, and so on. Daniel treats it all the same. And earlier with the midtones, I mentioned that they seem blended, but there isn't like actual blending there. If we zoom into these softer areas, there's still a lot of very visible brushwork, but the reason these areas look a lot softer is that there's much lower contrast of values and hues. So with the cheek and jaw area here, it looks super smooth until you zoom in, and then you see all this brushwork. But do you see how these colors are actually very similar to each other and create the illusion that they are blended together? On the other hand though, you will actually see areas of intentional blending and just general abstraction. These are especially visible in the background. The backgrounds in general do tend to be abstract, pretty much just a bunch of shapes scribbled together with jagged edges. But you'll also see that some of the characters' extremities are smudged out and blended into the background. And this is actually a very cool way to drive focus by literally making background or unimportant elements appear out of focus. So like here, you see how the face and the expensive looking lace on her neck and shoulder area are really well defined, but then her hair blends right into the background. It gives you the idea that her face and how she dresses are what make this character stand apart from the background. Here, although this is an unfinished piece, you see that the face is the only thing in focus, and that is where your eyes linger, looking for details and information. However, because everything in Daniel's paintings is textured, this trick with the blending doesn't look out of place or even purposeful. It is just one of those details that your mind absorbs without really thinking too deeply about it. It is really, really smart, and this is a technique I for sure want to take with me moving forward. So, to quickly sum up part 1 of this video, here are 4 key characteristics to Daniel Walsh's art. Number 1, Daniel's characters are, above all else, very realistic. He doesn't necessarily stylize proportions, pretty much all the storytelling comes from the hair, clothing, and accessories. 2, he usually sticks to a single, bright, warm or neutral key light, and this further enhances the realism. Drama comes not just from the value contrast, but also the interplay of color temperatures. 3, Daniel paints pretty much everything with textured brushes, but the gradual build-up of tones allows some areas to look more textured than others. And number 4, Daniel gives all the materials in his paintings the same texture treatment, and the abstraction around the silhouette allows your eye to be led to the most well-detailed focal point, usually the face. For our study today, this is the beautiful reference I chose because I feel like it illustrates everything we've spoken of so far really nicely. Now, because Daniel doesn't use any line art whatsoever, I started with the roughest of sketches. In fact, seeing as there isn't like a crazy amount of super sharp details in her face, I focused the sketch more on trying to very loosely indicate areas of light and shadow, just trying to match the overall forms as best as I could. We're just gonna paint over all of this anyway, so it doesn't have to be remotely neat or clean. Next, I dove in and painted the background for a bit. Seeing as it was mostly just a grey with some texture and little bits of brown, beige and white variations, I tried my best to find brushes that would give me a similar gritty feel and just colour matched as much as I could. Now, here's where things get interesting. This was before I watched any of Daniel's speed paints, remember? So at the time, I decided to have a bit more of a direct approach to painting this character. So I actually started by putting down a super dark base tone under the sketch just to block it in, and then I started to just paint directly over it with my chalk brush. No crazy techniques, just looking at the overall colours and trying to place them in the right areas. What's really funny is that for the absolute longest time, my painting looked pretty much exactly like Julianne Moore. Look at her. Tell me that's not the same person. That's crazy. And the kicker is, it didn't take a ton of adjustment to make my painting look less like Julianne Moore and more like the character in the study, which is so funny to me. The challenge here was definitely trying to make these colors match because, like I said, I started with a dark base. The character in the reference, however, has lighter hair. So when I was trying to approximate the color, it didn't occur to me until much later that values are relative and that unless I lightened the hair to match the reference better, the skin wasn't going to look the right color either. Look, I know. Okay, the skin is too warm and too high contrast at the moment. Those shadows are entirely too deep. It's a little crazy. It's okay. We will fix it. This was around the point when I realized I'd misjudged, and of course, this is where I lost a clip or two, but I did go about lightening the hair, color matching everything to be closer to the reference, and now the real work of refinement can begin. For the hair, I grabbed this brush called an RT Bristle 3. No idea what pack it's from, I have entirely too many, but it seemed to be doing exactly what I needed it to. And as soon as I textured about half the hair, I realized pretty much instantly that it was all still way too dark. So I did a super quick levels adjust to bring up the darker bits and also added in that blue of her top. And now we have much better context. I went ahead and textured the other side of her hair as well. This time I apparently used one of the RGBA oil brushes that we looked at in a video from a little while ago. And now we have to go ahead and make her look like herself as opposed to Julianne Moore. Turned out I had just painted the eye socket too deep and the iris wasn't quite the right color yet. That was literally it, bro. It is so bizarre how big a difference it makes to the piece when you make the tiniest change in the eyes. The other eye definitely felt like more of a challenge because it was way more abstract. The key, I realized, was to see this less as a face and more as a collection of abstract shapes. It's like deconstructing a portrait and looking at it as a sum of its parts. There is just so much subtle variation here, like the tiniest difference in value and tone shifts the entire expression of her face. It definitely required a ton of very conscious mark making. Finally, I did all the little details like the freckles in her face and the blending out of her silhouette. Remember all that abstraction? Plus, I did a refining pass over the background, adding more texture in, and here is the finished study. I am so happy with how she turned out. What do you think? You guys are not ready for this one because oh boy, am I in love with this original painting. So, I may or may not have gone hermit mode over the weekend and binge watched the entire new season of Arcane in like 2 days. And I may or may not have fallen into a deep, dark pit of despair during the finale. Well, I suppose I wasn't the only one who did, but today I figured for the original piece, I'd actually do some Jinx fan art. I won't spoil it in case you haven't watched it yet, but I did try to keep the design as close to her look in the episode as possible. I'd initially thought about doing some of her weapon stuff in the background, maybe like a row of shark teeth like her gun has, but like super abstract. Just put some colors down for now, and I went in and started to work on her. Okay, now here's the thing. Daniel likes to paint very vibrant, alive faces, but as a character, Jinx is very pale, very grey skin because of where she comes from under the ground. So I actually ended up spending a lot of the painting time trying to find the balance between the two. At this point, I realized that the drama had to all come from just the one light source, so I started to punch up the contrast, make her look more alive, without warming her skin up too much. After spending a lot of time trying to make those shark teeth work, I realized that it was still far too much detail to work with Daniel's style, and also far too distracting and took away from her too much. So I got rid of it and flattened out and lightened up the background a fair bit. I decided to go for like a muted dusky mauve in the end and just pasted in some graffiti photo texture, manipulated the colors in blending mode and made it super subtle. I blended out the edges of her arm, her top, and also her hair to make it match the sort of abstraction that Daniel paints. God, I am so in love with how she turned out. Ooh, definitely my favorite painting I've done this last half year or so. And there we have it, ARTWALSHY demystified. I still feel like I don't understand how he gets all that beautiful texture, especially in the background. Can someone let me know in the comments below? Please, I'd be so grateful, because I've watched his speed paints, like going back and watching them, and it does not compute in my mind. So let me know in the comments below. And also comment below what your biggest takeaway from this study was, because I'm really curious to know. I have, of course, linked all of Daniel's work down in the description. Make sure you go check him out and show him some love for me. And if you've enjoyed this video as well, make sure to show me some love as well by giving it a big thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. And we have what is arguably the most challenging self-study I've ever done coming up next week. So make sure you have your notifications on, because you definitely want to know when that one comes out. Come say hello on Instagram, Discord, and Kara. And if you like what I do and would like to support my work, you can grab a sweet little discount on my brush kit over on Buy Me a Coffee. The discount code is valid for just over another week. So all the details for that is down in the description, or you could just buy me a coffee on its own. A link to that is down below. Or if you want even more rewards every single week, it is all up on my Patreon, including the brush kit. So I will leave links to that in the video description as well. My video description is overpopulated, but check it out. Finally, are there any other artists you'd like to see a style study on? First, check out my style study playlist. It will show up here in just a sec. I've done a ton of these, and chances are I've probably covered some of your faves on the series before. But if I haven't, then feel free to let me know in the comments below, or come tell me on my Discord server, and I'll add your artist to my ever-growing list. Alrighty, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more style studies down here. Happy Style Study Month, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!